Chapter 1. A night of danger. Elena Rivera had always cherished the quiet evenings she spent in her small apartment, curled up with a book or listening to soft music as the city lights flickered outside her window. It was the kind of night that promised nothing more than peace, yet as she sipped her tea and glanced at the clock, a sudden unease prickled at the back of her neck. The streets below seemed too still, the shadows too long, and the feeling of being watched settled over her like a weight. She shook her head, telling herself it was just her imagination, just the lingering tension from a long week at work. Yet her instincts whispered otherwise. The sound of hurried footsteps outside her door made her heart leap into her throat. She froze, listening, straining to hear anything beyond the ordinary hum of the city. Then came a faint scraping noise, almost like someone testing the lock. Panic rose in her chest as adrenaline surged through her veins. She grabbed her phone and dialed her best friend, her fingers trembling, but before she could speak, the line went dead. The unease became terror as the door handle rattled gently, deliberately. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a figure bursting into the room. He moved with a controlled, lethal grace that made Elena's breath catch. Her eyes widened as she tried to comprehend the stranger who now stood between her and the danger she felt, but could not yet see. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb the dim light around him, and his eyes were sharp and intense, scanning the room and then locking onto hers with a focus that made her feel both alarmed and inexplicably safe. Before she could speak, he gestured for her to stay back, and then moved with precision, intercepting the intruder just as they attempted to force their way in. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the stranger handle the situation with swift efficiency. Within moments, the danger had vanished, leaving only the lingering sense of threat in the corners of her apartment. She wanted to thank him, to ask who he was, but before she could utter a word, he was already retreating toward the door. Elena's gaze followed him, mesmerized. There was something magnetic about him, a silent strength and confidence that both intimidated and fascinated her. She barely caught the sharp line of his jaw, the intensity of his dark eyes, and the way his movements were purposeful yet almost effortless. Then he was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of something warm and earthy, a reminder that he had been here, a ghost that would haunt her thoughts long after he disappeared. For the rest of the night, Elena could not shake the image of him. Every sound made her jump, every shadow seemed to hide danger, yet a part of her ached with a strange longing to see him again. She wondered who he was, why he had been there, and why, despite the terror, his presence had brought her an unexpected sense of safety. Sleep was impossible, replaced by a restless swirl of questions and emotions she could not name. By the time dawn's first light crept into her apartment, Elena knew one thing with certainty. Her life had changed in a single night, and the memory of the man who had saved her would linger, unbidden and unforgettable, guiding her into a future she could not yet imagine. Chapter 2. The mysterious protector. Elena could not shake the memory of him. The image of the stranger with piercing dark eyes, the way he moved with unerring precision, and the quiet confidence that radiated from him haunted her every waking moment. She replayed the events over and over in her mind, remembering how safe she had felt despite the fear, how the presence of that unknown man had seemed to push back the terror just enough for her to breathe again. The apartment, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt fragile, as if the shadows themselves were hiding dangers she could not see. As the days passed, Elena became acutely aware of small signs that someone was watching over her. A door left slightly ajar that she was sure she had closed, the faint echo of footsteps in the stairwell, a shadow slipping past her window when she thought she was alone. Part of her wanted to feel frightened, to retreat into caution, yet another part of her, the part that had felt the stranger's presence as a shield, felt strangely reassured. The thought of him lingered in the corners of her mind, a silent guardian she could neither see nor reach. Meanwhile, Gabriel Moretti observed her from a distance. His dark eyes studied her movements, noting her routines, the way she moved through her day, the the subtle expressions that betrayed worrying or fleeting happiness. Protecting her was not just a matter of duty, it had become an obsession, though he would never admit it even to himself. She was unaware of him, yet every instinct he had was focused on keeping her safe, anticipating threats before they could appear. He had seen the danger that had brushed so close to her life and had acted without hesitation. That night had confirmed something he did not yet fully understand, that the thought of her in harm's way was unbearable. Elena's friends began to notice her distracted demeanor. She laughed less freely, flinched more easily, and often found herself staring out of her apartment window as if expecting someone to appear. When they asked what was wrong, she offered vague explanations, unwilling to reveal that she had been the target of an unknown threat, unwilling to admit that her mind had become consumed with thoughts of the stranger who had saved her at night. She would sit with a cup of tea, replaying his presence in her mind. She imagined what it would be like to see him again, to speak with him, to understand the depth of his gaze and the strength that had protected her. The memory was intoxicating, a mixture of fear and fascination that left her restless. There was a question in the back of her mind, nagging and insistent, about who he really was and why he had chosen to save her. Yet she did not dare to hope that she would ever find the answer. Gabriel, in the meantime, remained a shadow in her life, close enough to ensure her safety, distant enough to remain unnoticed. He watched her interactions, noting the moments of hesitation, the tiny gestures that revealed worrying or curiosity. His own heart, trained to be disciplined and detached, responded in ways he could not ignore. Each smile she offered to a passerby, each laugh that escaped her lips, pulled at something deep inside him, something he had spent years hiding from the world. Elena could not explain the flutter of anticipation that accompanied each small, unexplained sign that someone was near. She did not know the identity of the man who had saved her, nor did she know the depth of the danger that still lingered just beyond her awareness. And yet, despite the uncertainty and fear, she felt a strange comfort, a sense of protection that warmed her and drew her thoughts back to him again and again. She could not stop thinking about the stranger whose presence had altered her life in ways she did not yet understand, and she could not help the growing, unspoken curiosity that he stirred within her heart. By the end of the week, Elena realized that her life had subtly shifted. Ordinary routines now carried a hint of suspense. Moments of silence held the possibility of unseen observation, and each fleeting shadow invited speculation and imagination. She had been touched by someone extraordinary, someone who had appeared in the most terrifying moment and had disappeared before she could even ask his name. And though she did not know it yet, her heart was already waiting for the next encounter, for the next moment that might bring the mysterious protector back into her life. Chapter 3. Crossing paths. It was a rainy afternoon when Elena first saw him again. Though she did not immediately recognize him, the rain streaked down the windows of the small cafe she had ducked into for shelter, blurring the city streets into a grey, misty canvas. She tucked her hair behind her ear and sipped her coffee, lost in thought, still haunted by the events of that fateful night. The memory of being saved, the image of those dark, intense eyes, lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. She had tried to convince herself that it was impossible she would ever see him again. Yet the city, with its endless streets and countless strangers, seemed to have other plans. He entered the cafe quietly, the bell above the door announcing him softly, almost imperceptibly. Elena felt her heart skip a beat as her eyes met his, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. Gabriel Moretti stood there, the same striking figure she remembered, yet somehow even more imposing in the casual setting of a crowded cafe. His gaze was sharp, assessing, yet when it landed on her, there was a flicker of recognition, a subtle softening that made her chest tighten. She did not move, uncertain whether to acknowledge him or retreat into anonymity, but the pull between them was undeniable. Gabriel approached, careful not to startle her. He slid into the seat across from her with the quiet assurance of someone accustomed to control, his presence commanding yet strangely comforting. Elena swallowed, feeling the warmth of her cheeks and the flutter of nervous anticipation. He did not smile, at least not in the way one would expect, but his expression held something unspoken, a mixture of concern and curiosity that made her pulse quicken. "Do I know you?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly despite her effort to sound composed. The words felt absurd even as they left her lips, because in that instant she realized she already did know him, though she did not know his name or the full truth of who he was. "You might say that," he replied evenly, his tone calm but carrying a weight that made her shiver. "I've been making sure you stay safe." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, and a rush of questions rose to her lips, but she hesitated. There was something about him, a magnetism, that made her wary even as it drew her closer. The city around them continued its usual hustle and chatter, yet the space between them felt suspended, isolated from the world outside. She wanted to ask more, to understand why he had appeared that night, why he had risked so much, yet the words felt inadequate, unable to capture the swirling mix of fear, curiosity, and fascination inside her. Gabriel leaned back slightly, studying her with the same intensity that had defined their first encounter. His eyes lingered on her, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers fiddled nervously with her cup, and the slight tremor in her voice. He wanted to say more, to explain, to reassure, but the truth was complicated, layered with dangers and choices he could not easily reveal. Instead, he offered a quiet presence, steady and unyielding, a promise that even in silence, he was there for Elena. The moment was electric. She sensed danger and safety intertwined in the same space, confusion and clarity merging in the same heartbeat. She did not know his full story, nor did she understand why her heart raced in ways it had never done before, but she felt a pull toward him that defied logic. It was as if some invisible thread had tied their fates together, binding them in a moment of recognition that went far beyond words. The rain continued to fall outside, soft and insistent, while inside the cafe, just strangers who were no longer strangers found themselves locked in an unspoken connection. Elena realized, almost with a start, that she had been waiting for this encounter. That part of her had known she would see him again. And Gabriel, for all his training and discipline, felt the same inexplicable tug, a rare vulnerability that whispered of the bond forming between them. Neither spoke further at that moment, yet the silence was charged with understanding. The world outside might continue its chaos, but here, in this quiet intersection of fate, something significant had begun, something that would change both of their lives in ways neither could yet foresee. Chapter 4. A life in shadows. Gabriel had always lived in the shadows, a world defined by silence, precision, and danger. He was trained to anticipate threats, to move unseen, to remain detached, and to keep his emotions carefully contained. Yet Elena had begun to chip away at that armor with every look, every hesitant smile, and every question that hinted at curiosity other than fear. He had never allowed anyone into his life before, and the thought of showing even a fragment of his world to another person was both unsettling and strangely compelling. Elena noticed the first hints of his guarded nature the moment she stepped into the apartment he had brought her to after a tense day of avoiding threats. The place was orderly, almost sterile, yet it carried traces of a life carefully managed and fiercely protected. There were no personal mementos, no signs of casual comfort, only the tools of someone who lived with danger as a constant companion. And yet, in the careful organization, Elena sensed glimpses of humanity's small choices that hinted at who he was when no one else was watching. They sat across from each other in silence at first, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. Elena wanted to ask everything and nothing at the same time. Who was he? Why had he saved her? Why did he linger in her life when she had no idea who he was beyond that night of terror? She saw the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked constantly to the door and windows, and she realized just how different his world was from hers. Gabriel, for his part, found himself watching her with a mixture of caution and fascination. She was ordinary, yet extraordinary. She carried herself with grace under fear, spoke with honesty even when unsure, and possessed a curiosity that drew him in despite the rules he had always lived by. Allowing her a glimpse into his world felt dangerous, yet something in her presence made him willing to take the risk. He began to reveal small fragments of his life, carefully chosen and measured. He spoke of his routines, the way he navigated the city, the importance of remaining unseen, and the constant need to anticipate danger. Elena listened intently, absorbing every word, fascinated rather than intimidated. She asked questions, not to pry into the darkness, but to understand him, to see the man beneath the reputation of fear that surrounded him. And with each answer, she saw glimpses of vulnerability, moments where the mask of the hitman faltered and something human shone through. For the first time, Elena realized that the man who had saved her was more than a shadow, more than a figure of danger. He had fears, loyalties, and a capacity for care that was rare in the world he inhabited. She found herself drawn to those moments of quiet honesty, when the world's threats seemed to fall away and they could simply be two people in a room, cautiously exploring the possibility of trust. The evening stretched on, marked by conversation that flowed and paused, by laughter that came softly and without pretense, and by moments of silence that spoke louder than words. Elena felt herself opening up, revealing fragments of her own fears and desires, sharing thoughts she had never voiced aloud. And Gabriel, despite the discipline that had defined his life for so long, felt a strange, unexpected comfort in her presence, a sense that he could allow himself to exist for a brief time outside the constant vigilance that defined him. By the time fully settled over the city, both of them knew that something significant had begun. Elena had glimpsed a man living in shadows, yet yearning for connection, and Gabriel had experienced a rare vulnerability, drawn to someone who understood danger yet was not consumed by it. The trust between them was fragile, like glass balanced on the edge of possibility, yet it was there, solid enough to hold, and powerful enough to pull them closer together, even as the world outside remained uncertain and threatening. As Elena left that evening, stepping back into the quiet streets of the city, she carried with her a sense of intrigue and warmth. She did not yet know what lay ahead, but she felt that in Gabriel, she had found someone who could protect her and perhaps even see her in ways no one else ever had. And for Gabriel, the memory of her presence lingered like a beacon, a reminder that even in the darkness, light could be found if he allowed himself to reach for it. Chapter 5. Trusting the heart. Elena had never shared her deepest fears with anyone before, not truly. She had friends who listened to her casual complaints and family who offered comfort in familiar ways, but there had never been anyone who inspired her to reveal the raw, vulnerable pieces of herself. Yet with Gabriel, something felt different. Perhaps it was the intensity of his presence, the way his dark eyes seemed to see her without judgment, or perhaps it was the memory of the night he had saved her, a night that had left an indelible mark on her soul. Whatever it was, she found herself talking in ways she had never allowed before. She spoke of her childhood, the quiet loneliness of growing up in a city that felt so large and impersonal, the small moments of joy she had clung to, and the dreams she had dared to hold on to despite the uncertainty of life. She shared her fears, not only of the world outside, but of the vulnerabilities that came from trusting someone, of the danger of letting another person see the pieces of her heart that had been carefully protected. Gabriel listened, truly listened, with a patience that disarmed her and a quiet respect that made her feel safe. Gabriel, in turn, revealed fragments of himself in ways he had never done before. He did not speak of the work that defined him or the enemies he had faced, but of the fleeting moments of humanity that punctuated his life in darkness. He told her about the small routines that gave him control, the rare instances of quiet joy he allowed himself when he believed no one was watching, and the rare guilt that lingered when duty and morality collided. Each revelation was measured, carefully chosen, yet Elena could see the vulnerability in the pauses, in the way his eyes softened when he spoke, in the brief tension in his shoulders that suggested a lifelong habit of self-control. Their conversations became a rhythm, a shared space where danger was a distant thought and honesty ruled. They laughed over small things, teasing about ordinary mishaps and mundane details of life that felt miraculous in contrast to the chaos that usually surrounded Gabriel. Elena found herself leaning into these moments, feeling the warmth of connection, the quiet thrill of being understood without pretense. Gabriel, who had always kept the world at arm's length, felt the strange pull of companionship, the subtle ache of wanting to protect someone not just out of duty, but out of care and affection. At times, the weight of their realities pressed upon them, and the conversation would falter. Elena's mind would drift to the night he had saved her, to the unseen dangers that lingered beyond the city streets. Gabriel's thoughts would drift to threats he had neutralized, to the necessity of remaining vigilant, to the rules of a life he could not easily abandon. Yet even in those moments, the connection between them remained, a tether that neither could ignore, a growing trust that quietly demanded acknowledgement. One evening, as they shared a simple meal in her apartment, the rain tapping gently against the windows, Gabriel reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Elena's face. The gesture was tentative, almost reverent, yet it carried a weight neither of them could ignore. Elena's breath caught, and she felt the flutter of anticipation, the mixture of fear and longing that had become a constant companion whenever he was near. It was in that moment, small and unassuming, that the depth of their bond became undeniable. For Elena, trusting Gabriel with her heart was not a choice made lightly. She had known fear, she had known vulnerability, and she had known the fragility of safety. Yet here was a man who had proven, time and again, that he could protect her, who had shown patience and restraint, and who had inspired a sense of security that transcended the mere absence of danger. For Gabriel, allowing Elena into the corners of his guarded heart was equally terrifying and exhilarating. He had spent years hiding behind masks, yet with her, the desire to be seen and understood became overpowering, a force he could not deny. By the end of that night, they sat quietly, shoulders brushing, hearts beating in sync without the need for words. The trust they had cultivated was fragile, yet it held, stronger than either had expected. In each other, they had found a rare refuge, a place where vulnerability was met with acceptance, and where the tentative steps toward intimacy promised something profound. In the shadows of their lives, they had discovered the beginnings of a light that neither had anticipated, but both had longed for more than they realized. Chapter 6: A Threat Returns. Weeks of tentative peace were shattered the moment Elena realized she was being followed again. It started with subtle signs, a shadow lingering a little too long in the corner of her vision, the faint echo of footsteps behind her as she left work, the soft click of a door closing somewhere she had just been. At first, she tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a trick of her mind fueled by memories of that terrifying night when Gabriel had first saved her. But deep down, a gnawing fear told her that danger had returned, more insistent and deliberate than before. Gabriel had sensed it first. He had been monitoring from a distance, tracking the movements of those who posed a threat to her safety, and he immediately recognized the signs of a familiar pattern. He had faced this kind of danger before, enemies who lingered in the shadows, who calculated and waited for the perfect moment to strike. The thought of Elena caught in that crossfire made his jaw tighten and his heart race in ways he had long tried to suppress. He moved swiftly, methodically, to neutralize any risk. Yet he knew that keeping her safe now required more than observation, it required active intervention. Elena, unaware of the specifics, felt the tension in the air as if the city itself were holding its breath. Each day became a careful negotiation with fear. She avoided unfamiliar streets, double-checked locks, and held her phone tightly, ready to call for help at a moment's notice. And yet, even in the midst of growing anxiety, there was a strange reassurance that she could not fully articulate, the feeling that someone was watching over her, that she was not entirely alone in facing the encroaching danger. The confrontation came suddenly, catching Elena off guard. As she exited a grocery store late one evening, a man stepped from the shadows, his intentions clear in the cold, calculating look in his eyes. Her heart raced, and panic gripped her chest. But before she could even scream, Gabriel appeared as if he had materialized from the night itself. His movements were precise, fluid, and undeniably lethal, a choreography of danger that left her both terrified and in awe. Within moments, the threat was neutralized, the man retreating or incapacitated, and Elena was once again safe, though shaken to the core. As they walked back to her apartment, Elena's hands trembled, and she clung to the safety of Gabriel's presence. For the first time, she saw the intensity of his life laid bare, the constant vigilance, the awareness of every potential threat, and the readiness to act without hesitation. It was frightening, yet there was a part of her that felt drawn to him even more, admiring the unwavering strength that protected her so completely. Gabriel, for his part, could not ignore the rush of emotion that surged when he saw the fear in her eyes. It was not merely concern, it was something deeper, a bond forged through shared peril, a recognition of the fragility of life and the preciousness of trust. He had spent years in solitude, yet the thought of losing her, of failing to protect her, was unbearable. Every instinct, every carefully honed skill, was now devoted entirely to her safety. The incident forced a new dynamic between them. Elena began to rely on Gabriel, only for protection, but also for guidance, and he, in turn, allowed himself to be vulnerable in ways he had never permitted before. She asked questions, expressing her fear and uncertainty, and he answered as honestly as he could, without revealing the full extent of his dangerous world. Their connection deepened, forged in the crucible of shared risk and reinforced by the unspoken understanding that neither could face what lay ahead alone. That night, as Elena sat in her apartment with Gabriel nearby, the city lights casting long shadows on the walls, she realized that her world had irrevocably changed. Danger was no longer a distant possibility, it was an ever-present reality, but so was Gabriel, and in the midst of fear and uncertainty, she found a strange comfort, a warmth that told her they could face anything together. She did not yet know how deep her feelings for him ran, nor did she fully comprehend the way he had come to occupy her thoughts and heart, but she knew that something significant had begun. The threat had returned, but so had the undeniable connection between two people whose lives were entwined by circumstance, courage, and a growing trust that neither could ignore. Chapter 7. Stolen moments. Even amidst the lingering danger, life insisted on small, fleeting normalities, and Gabriel and Elena found themselves seizing every opportunity for moments together. These stolen moments were brief, fragile, and yet powerful enough to leave a lasting impression on both of them. A shared coffee in a quiet cafe, a walk through a rain-slicked street where the world seemed to pause, a glance that held unspoken understanding, all became threads, weaving them closer together, binding their hearts with subtlety and intensity. Elena discovered the thrill of these quiet interludes. The tension of their circumstances heightened every touch, every brush of hands, and every fleeting smile. She felt a rush of life in the midst of fear, a sweetness in the ordinary that had been absent from her days before Gabriel entered her world. She noticed how he watched her when he thought she was unaware, how his expression softened in ways no one else ever saw, and how even his silence seemed to carry a protective warmth. Gabriel, too, felt the shift within himself. The presence of Elena was a disarming force, a rare intrusion into the disciplined isolation of his life. He found himself craving the moments when he could let down his guard, when danger was momentarily forgotten, and he could simply exist with her. Every shared laugh, every subtle touch, every quiet conversation was a treasure he could not allow himself to take for granted. It was in these moments, fleeting though they were, that he realized the depth of his feelings, though he had yet to fully articulate them to either himself or Elena. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the city in shades of amber and gold, They found themselves on a quiet terrace above the bustling streets. The warmth of the fading sun mingled with the chill of the evening air, and for a time, neither spoke. Elena leaned against the railing, feeling the rhythm of the city below and the steady presence of Gabriel beside her. When their eyes met, a silent understanding passed between them, a recognition that this rare, fragile piece was theirs alone. Even if just for a moment, the first tentative touches came slowly, as if testing the boundaries of this unspoken intimacy. A hand brushed hers while reaching for a glass, a finger lingered against her arm, a shoulder pressed gently against her back. Each contact sent shivers through Elena. Each gesture stirred something deep within Gabriel, a growing awareness of the connection they shared. It was a delicate dance, where fear and desire intertwined, and every stolen moment became a reaffirmation of trust and attraction. They spoke less and experienced more, letting the closeness of their presence communicate what words could not. Whispers shared in the shadows, laughter that broke the weight of tension, and quiet confessions of hopes and fears became the foundation of something neither had anticipated. Love blossoming amid uncertainty and danger. Elena found herself drawn to the strength behind Gabriel's controlled exterior, the moments where his humanity shone through, and the rare glimpses of tenderness that made her heart ache with longing. Gabriel, in turn, realized that the bond he shared with Elena was unlike anything he had known. The moments together were not merely distractions from his dangerous world, they were anchors. They reminded him of the life he could have if he allowed himself to trust, to care, and to hope. He had spent so long existing in shadows that these fleeting glimpses of light were almost overwhelming in their intensity, yet he could not deny the pull of his heart toward her. Chapter 8. The ultimate sacrifice. Gabriel had always known that the life he led demanded choices, sacrifices that most people could not comprehend. Protecting Elena had become his mission, but the deeper their bond grew, the more the stakes weighed on him. He could no longer treat her safety as a matter of professional obligation alone. She had become a part of his life, a presence he could not imagine losing. And when the threat resurfaced stronger than ever, he realized that he would have to risk everything to keep her alive. Elena sensed the tension in him before he even spoke. There was a heaviness in his gaze, a shadow that dimmed the warmth she had come to rely on. She asked if he was all right, her voice soft, tentative, filled with concern. Gabriel's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, revealing the depth of his fear not for himself, but for her. He could have brushed it off with a casual remark, but he did not. He needed her to understand that this was not just another mission. This was his heart on the line. The danger escalated quickly. Those who had been lurking in the shadows struck with precision and brutality. Elena found herself in the middle, her world shrinking to the immediate threats around her. Gabriel acted with calculated intensity, moving through the chaos like a force of nature, shielding her, guiding her, and ensuring she remained unharmed. Every instinct he had honed over years of darkness was now devoted entirely to her survival. In the midst of the chaos, Elena saw him of a way she never had before. The man who had once been a distant, mysterious protector now revealed the raw depth of his commitment. There was no hesitation, no doubt in his actions, only an unwavering resolve to place her safety above his own. Fear, admiration, and an overwhelming sense of love surged within her as she realized the extent to which he cared, how much he valued her life even above his own. When the threat reached its peak, Gabriel made a choice that left no room for compromise. He placed himself directly between Elena and the danger, exposing himself to harm, moving with deliberate courage that left her breathless. In that instant, Elena saw the man behind the hitman persona, the one capable of love, devotion, and unimaginable bravery. Her heart ached with the awareness that he would risk everything for her, that he had already begun to define his life not by shadows and survival, but by her presence in it. After the immediate threat was neutralized, they found a quiet refuge, a rare moment to breathe and absorb the intensity of what had transpired. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for him, touching his face gently, memorizing every line and contour that had carried her through danger. She began, struggling for words that could encompass her fear, gratitude, and growing affection. Gabriel silenced her with a soft, lingering gaze, letting her feel the unspoken truth, that he had risked everything because she mattered to him more than anything else. Tears came unbidden to Elena's eyes, a mixture of relief and love, and she pressed herself closer to him, feeling the warmth and strength that had kept her safe. "I love you," she whispered, the words tentative yet resolute, carrying the weight of everything she had experienced, every stolen moment, and every fear overcome. Gabriel's response was quiet, but full of meaning. He held her close, his breath steadying hers, and in the depths of his gaze, she saw the reflection of his own heart laid bare. "And I love you," he said, voice low and firm. "More than anything. I always have, and I always will." In that moment, the world outside faded, the shadows and threats momentarily held at bay, leaving only the two of them in the fragile, precious reality they had fought to preserve. Elena understood fully that the man she loved was not perfect, that his life was entwined with danger. Yet she also realized that love had the power to pierce through even the darkest of lives. And Gabriel, for all his years of solitude and guarded existence, knew that the ultimate sacrifice he had made was only the beginning of the life he wanted to build with her, a life no longer defined by fear, but by trust, connection, and a love that had proven its strength in the crucible of danger. Chapter 9. Facing the future together. The city felt different in the days following the final confrontation. The shadows that had once seemed to stretch endlessly now receded slightly, and even the air seemed lighter, carrying with it the promise of a life that was no longer defined solely by danger. Elena walked through the streets with a new awareness, her steps lighter, her senses no longer tense with fear. The world had not changed, but she had, and the presence of Gabriel beside her made everything feel both safe and alive in a way she had never experienced before. Gabriel, too, felt the shift profoundly. The constant vigilance that had dominated his every moment was no longer as consuming. He still recognized the need for caution, yet he allowed himself small, unguarded moments of hope. The threat had been neutralized, and for the first time in years, he could imagine a life where protection did not always mean survival, where love could coexist with danger without being overshadowed by it. The thought of sharing that life with Elena filled him with a cautious optimism he had long thought impossible. Their days began to settle into a rhythm that felt natural, even comforting. Simple routines, morning coffee together, walks through quiet parks, conversations that stretched late into the night became the foundation of a shared life that neither had anticipated. Elena discovered the joy of ordinary moments amplified by the knowledge that they were safe together, while Gabriel relished the chance to see the world through her eyes, to experience lightness and warmth in ways he had long denied himself. Yet even in these moments of calm, they did not forget the fragility of their past. Elena knew that danger had once brushed too close to her life, that the man she loved had lived in the shadows for reasons she could only begin to understand. Gabriel, in turn, carried the memory of what he had sacrificed, the risks he had taken, and the constant weight of his past. And yet, these memories no longer defined them. Instead, they became a reminder of the strength they had discovered in each other and the resilience that their bond had forged. One evening, as they sat on a quiet terrace overlooking the twinkling city lights, Elena turned to Gabriel with a tentative smile. "Do you think we can really do this?" she asked, her voice soft but full of curiosity. "Live a normal life, together." Gabriel took her hand, holding it gently but firmly. His dark eyes, intense yet tender, met hers. "We can," he said. "We'll face whatever comes next together. No more running, no more hiding, just us." A sense of peace settled over them in that moment, the kind that comes only after fear and uncertainty have been confronted and overcome. Elena rested her head against Gabriel's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, and knew that she had found her place not only in the safety of his protection, but in the depth of his love. Gabriel, feeling her warmth and trust, understood that he had found more than companionship. He had found a life worth living beyond the darkness, a life anchored by love and hope. Together, they began to envision a future that had once seemed impossible. They spoke of small plans, shared dreams, and quiet ambitions that had nothing to do with survival or danger. Each conversation, each gesture, each laugh brought them closer to a life defined by choice rather than circumstance, and in each other's eyes they saw a reflection of strength, trust, and the unwavering bond that had carried them through the storms of the past. By the time the night deepened, stars scattered across the sky like fragile promises. Elena and Gabriel knew that they had reached a turning point. The future was no longer a shadowy unknown. It was a canvas awaiting the strokes of their shared journey. Fear had once dictated their lives, but love now guided them, promising days filled with laughter, trust, and the quiet certainty that, together, they could face anything. Chapter 10. Love in the light. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a gentle glow across the room where Elena and Gabriel lay entwined, the city outside slowly stirring to life. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was no pressing danger, no lurking shadows, no constant threat demanding vigilance. The air was filled instead with warmth, quiet contentment, and the palpable presence of love that had grown steadily, carefully, and fiercely between them. Elena shifted slightly, feeling the steady rhythm of Gabriel's heartbeats beneath her ear. She traced a finger lightly along his arm, marveling at the calm that had replaced the constant tension she had carried for so long. Every moment with him felt precious, a reminder of how far they had come from fear to trust, from chaos to a fragile peace, and finally, to a love that no longer existed in the margins, but at the very center of their lives. Gabriel opened his eyes and looked down at her with a softness that had rarely touched his expression in the past. His usual intensity was tempered by a quiet joy, a serenity born of knowing that the person he cared for most was safe, present, and fully aware of the depth of his feelings. "Morning," he murmured, his voice low but warm, carrying the promise of another day together. "Morning," Elena replied, her smile gentle but full of the happiness that had bloomed in her heart. She felt a surge of gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought them together, for the night of danger that had led to every stolen moment, every whispered conversation, and every tender touch that had become the foundation of their love. As they rose and moved through their day, the rhythm of life unfolded naturally. Breakfast was shared with laughter and teasing, a simple ritual that carried the weight of intimacy and comfort. They ventured outside, walking hand in hand through the streets that had once been filled with fear, now illuminated by the knowledge that they were free to exist together without constant vigilance. The city seemed less harsh, the people around them softer, and the world suddenly ripe with possibility. Elena and Gabriel explored not only the city, but each other's hearts. Conversations turned to dreams, hopes, and plans for the future. They spoke of trips they might take, quiet evenings spent in one another's company, and the life they wanted to build together, a life that was no longer defined by survival, but by love, trust, and shared joy. Each word, each laugh, each glance reinforced the bond that had been tested and strengthened through peril, creating a foundation that neither could imagine ever being shaken. Gabriel found himself savoring every ordinary moment as if it were extraordinary. The feel of Elena's hand in his, the sound of her laughter, the way she leaned against him without hesitation, all of it reminded him that the life he had once believed impossible was now tangible, reachable, and endlessly fulfilling. The man who had lived in shadows, who had been defined by duty and danger, now felt the liberating warmth of love and trust, a light that filled spaces he had long kept closed. Elena, too, felt the depth of their connection in ways words could scarcely capture. Love had transformed fear into courage, isolation into companionship, and uncertainty into hope. She looked at Gabriel and saw not only the protector who had saved her life, But the man who had touched her heart, challenged her soul, and made her believe in the possibility of happiness beyond survival. The wounds of the past, the scars of danger, were no longer barriers. They were reminders of what they had overcome together. As evening fell, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, they returned to their sanctuary, sitting side by side on the terrace overlooking the city. The lights below twinkled like a reflection of the life they had forged, a life that was bright, tender, and enduring. Elena rested her head against Gabriel's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, drawing her close. Words were unnecessary because their hearts spoke in harmony, in quiet affirmations of trust, love, and unshakable devotion. In the light of that evening, they knew their story had reached a place of completeness. Danger and shadows might have marked their past, but love had defined their present and illuminated the path ahead. Together, they could face whatever came next, knowing that the greatest threat had already been overcome, the fear of losing one another. And as they watched the city glow under the fading sun, Elena whispered, "We did it. We're really here." Gabriel kissed the top of her head, his voice steady and full of certainty. "Yes, here, together, always." In that moment, two hearts that had once lived in fear and solitude found solace, safety, and the enduring warmth of love. Their lives, once shadowed and uncertain, now shone brightly with hope, laughter, and the unbreakable bond of two souls who had discovered that even in a dangerous world, love could prevail and light the way forward.